All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to SaberSim's DFS Office Hours. It is Friday, February 25th of 2022. Happy Friday to everybody. We've got a couple questions on tap here for today's stream. We've got a follow-up question about correlation in research builds. This was a topic that we were talking about a little bit yesterday. So we'll go back into that. And then there's a question from a meme here. Good question about correlation in NHL, in the Sims, actually. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well. Tough question. I guess both of them kind of tough in their own right. So we'll have an opportunity to spend a little bit of time on both. Those are the only two questions in my queue. So we'll hit those. And then as we move along, I've got an opportunity to show off a new feature here today that I'm pretty excited about. We've actually had a pretty busy week in pumping out new features, so might be an opportunity to talk about a couple different features actually that are going on here. But there is one in particular that has not been announced yet. It is live in the app right now. It is a very commonly requested feature. In fact, maybe my most commonly requested feature in the last month or so, and it hasn't been announced anywhere else yet. So if anybody don't want to send anybody off away from stream, running somewhere else or running to the app to go figure it out and then not watching the stream, but trying to build some anticipation here, we'll do a little bit of a demo of this new feature. We'll talk about it here on stream today. And then, of course, later today, I'll probably end up putting out a separate video and kind of doing the blast in Slack about this. So anyway, keep you guys on the edge of your feet. Is that the expression? That feels weird coming out of my mouth today. Keeping you on your toes, something like that. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into it here and start answering some questions here. So I'm going to pick this one up. This came in from Tone yesterday. This was about the NHL, correlation and research builds, really. And he said, watching the stream from today now on the way back home from work, heard you talking about research builds in relations to stacks. You were referring to hockey today, but I believe last baseball season you recommended leaving correlation on for those builds. Has your school of thought changed for baseball as well? Do you recommend setting stack rules for research builds in baseball as well? If so, what types of rules specifically? I normally trust Saber to give me stacks using correlation and focus on maximizing player upside. So within some of those stacks, I get lower order batters that may not potentially show up who have the potential to have that one good night. Okay, good question, right? I'm going to summarize this here so people know in research builds what we're talking about on the label there. Okay, so first thing I want to say here, because I made it clear yesterday, but I want to make it again clear today for anybody that's maybe just watching this. We are, for the purposes of this conversation, I am talking only about research builds. The last thing I want anybody to do is get the impression that I am telling them to turn their correlation slider off when you are actually building lineups. That is not at all what I want anybody to do. Correlation is important. It gives us a huge edge. I have been turning my correlation slider off for higher correlation sports only when I do research builds, because what I specifically want to see is player exposures, right? I am interested in seeing how often an individual player shows up in the optimal lineup, agnostic to that player's correlation to other players in that lineup, right? So if, for example, if I'm going to be doing research builds and what I'm seeing is that maybe, Colorado line one, or, actually Vegas line one is over-owned, right? I want the exposure that I'm seeing in that research build for Eichel and Pacioretty and all these guys to be in line with what their actual percent chance is to be in the optimal lineup. I don't want to artificially inflate individual player exposures because I've introduced correlation to the research build. That is purely for my research. That's what I am most interested in, researching players. I let the stacks come later, right? I know that if I think Pacioretty and Eichel are over-owned, then I'm going to be under on Vegas line one anyway. I don't need to do personally, I don't feel like I need to do the research on the individual stacks because I'm already doing it on the players. Now, if you want to research stacks, if you're trying to do a research build and trying to ask yourself, what are the percent chances of a stack being optimal, then I think you should add in a stacking rule. I've moved away from ever using the correlation slider in research builds because I don't want the player projections for an individual lineup to be adjusted, which is what will happen when you use correlation at a non-zero value. So I think it's easier to just set the stacking rule here and say, you know, this is kind of what I end up doing. And this would be purely to research stacks. So this is still going to use single slate simulations for each individual lineup, but it's going to force 2 stacks into each build. And you can use that to roughly approximate a percent chance of a stack being optimal. But you really can't do these 2 things at the same time. If you set a stack rule, it's going to basically I don't even know what the right word is. It poisons the player exposures in your research build because they're no longer necessarily accurate, right? You're going to get higher exposure to certain skaters and lower exposure to others because you're forcing a stack into the research build. And the opposite is true as well. If you're using just a regular research build with no stacks at all written into it, you can't really research the stacks. You can't see how likely a stack is to be optimal because the lineups are just single slate optimals themselves. They're not going to have a lot of stacks, period, because the highest actual scoring optimal on an NHL slate is rarely stacked. There's too many players in the pool. It's too easy to just to have the optimal just be the one highest scoring player from each individual game or something like that. So again, I just kind of want to reiterate, I think there's like 2 or 3 big points here. The first, and the one that I want to be as explicitly clear as possible, is this conversation is only about research builds, and specifically about research builds where you are trying to do this, where you are trying to see what is the percent chance of a player being optimal on the slate. If you are building your actual lineups for a slate, please leave your correlation slider on. Second, I wouldn't say there is a right answer to this question. It is about what you are attempting to accomplish with your builds. If you want to research stacks, put a stack rule in your research build. If you want to research players, don't. My research has kind of at least shifted more towards being interested in researching individual players than stacks, right? I think it gives you more flexibility in terms of why. Like the example of baseball is pretty good. Let's say the Dodgers are going over-owned, but in your research build, what you actually see is that it's like 1 through 5 for the Dodgers are going over-owned. I might entertain the idea of playing some like 6, 7, 8, 9 type stacks. If they're, National League probably wouldn't have the 9 spot in there for most of the time, but it sounds like universal DH is happening anyway. I don't even know if baseball is happening. So anyway, that's an aside, but I might be more interested in playing a particular type of stack on a team if I can identify that certain players are going over-owned rather than a stack, just for example. So that is, I know the old MLB content that is up on YouTube from last season features a lot more of me researching stacks rather than players. And I don't think any of that's wrong. I've just kind of changed mostly via hockey season and football season. I've gotten a little more interested in researching the individual players. So hopefully that was helpful. Tone, it sounds like you're one of my commute guys that watches the show on the drive home. So if you catch up with this show later today, let me know if you have any other kind of follow-up questions there, if I was able to help out there. So, but cool. Let's do it. Let's keep it going. Question from a meme. This is a good one. This is a tough one. A meme said he's trying to stump me one day on this stream, and you maybe did hear with this one today. This is an interesting question. He said, anyone know what correlation values seem to value power play lines way more than even strength lines? Is it relative to time on ice or per game? It shows power play 2 line mates as higher correlated than even strength mates. And then there's kind of an example here. And I did a little bit of research this morning as well. And I think this is mostly true. So I'm going to give my kind of explanation of what I think intuitively is going on here. And then we'll talk about a couple other things that are in play here. So first, I've noticed that this is mostly true for skaters skating on lower even strength lines. So like line even 2, but like especially 3 and 4 that are also featured on a power play line. And I think what we see in general for especially those kind of skaters here is that their correlations are much more strongly to the skaters that they share the power play line with than the even strength line, because their highest ceiling, their biggest point scoring outcomes are in the sims occur more often on the power plays, right? Like these guys that don't even necessarily get as much time on ice with their even strength line and have less goal scoring and fantasy point scoring opportunities on the even strength line, their opportunities are much higher on the power play opportunities, right? So that is kind of my best intuitive guess of like what is going on here. I did ask the model team about this here. Matt actually mentioned that we may have a potential bias here in our NHL model that overvalues power play scoring slightly and also undervalues the actual time on the ice that even strength lines skate. So there's a potential too that there's a little bit of a bias here. That would be something that we would look at and potentially update in a future update to the NHL Sims. I still kind of have an open question out to the model team about this question because again, I don't watch a ton of hockey. I am less researched on hockey, so that's kind of my intuitive explanation for what I think is going on here. But I think it's definitely possible there's a little bit of bias here as well. With that said, on a practical level, ways to deal with this. I think the correlations for our hockey sims are very good. I think they're going to be much better than what is out there elsewhere, which is honestly a lot of nothing, a lot of historical rules of thumb, a lot of generalization, a lot of kind of blind stacking. So I think they're still very good. But with that said, I do think hockey is one of those sports where I think you can really benefit from creating some stacking rules for yourself that really target the lineup constructions you want to play. I think Mr. Clean and Couch brought this up when they were on doing our NHL strategy session at the start of the season. I think that's one of the higher value things you can do in the build settings is still take advantage of our correlations, right? Leave your correlation slider on, take advantage of them, but kind of give the builder some backstops, some guardrails with some stacking rules on either side to kind of help pull that in. And I think actually, my most common stacking rules that I end up doing are even strength line stacks, because I think, if anything, we are likely to undervalue even strength line correlations slightly. So I think building those kinds of stacks in manually can help out a lot. Doesn't mean your stacking rules need to necessarily be this or this for every slate, but I think it can be helpful. So. Cool. I see some questions coming in YouTube chat. We're gonna hit the rest of the questions in Slack, and then we'll jump over to YouTube chat here. This is Ruben via Trent. Is there an ideal strategy for NBA lineup construction on DraftKings? I've seen some top players choose high dollar players, and then 5 other players that are undervalued. Yeah, so I've gotten this question before, phrased in different ways, and I think in general, thinking about things as a target lineup construction in general oversimplifies the game in a way that will kind of push you down a certain path that isn't always viable. It isn't always viable for a particular slate, right? You can't necessarily pay up for 2 or even 3 high dollar players and pack in with 5 other value pieces if there isn't good value on the slate. Or if the best value plays, the best point per dollar projected plays are, in this case, it's actually, there's a lot of cheap value. But if the best overall value plays are 6 and 7K, then you're going to be forced, or you're going to be encouraged more to a balanced build. The other thing this doesn't really take into account is your contest, right? There's going to be kind of quite a bit of diversity in how your lineup construction actually might look like in different sized contests, right? And how much really you'll stray from whatever the optimal lineup construction is that particular night, right? If on a night like tonight, it looks like some of the best overall plays are the really expensive guys and some of the best value opportunities are the really cheap plays, I think we're going to be kind of shuffled in this direction tonight of playing this kind of lineup construction. But as your sim variance slider gets higher, as you are playing bigger contests and you get more diverse lineups, you will see lineups that diversify not only the players and the exposures, but also the constructions in them. And that's exactly what you want to do, right? It's not only that we get an ownership edge from playing players that are lower owned. We get a leverage, we get an edge over the field when we play lineup constructions that are unique in the contest as well. So I would not generalize and say really for almost any sport that on every single slate that the lineup construction, the optimal path is always the same. On a practical level, here's what I would do is if you are sitting down and you're ready to start building lineups for the slate, or you just want to research a little bit, there's a lot of information to parse when you're on step 1 here. You're trying to kind of figure out like what's the best way to play the slate. build some lineups, run what we call a test build that fits the kind of contest you're playing, right? If you're playing the and one, 20 max 10 to 50K, right? Come in here, don't touch a thing, don't need to change any projections, any settings, just tell us what contest you're playing and see what the lineups look like. Look at what the constructions look like. Because there are slates where it's going to be this, right? There's so much value, right? This literally looks like this is how tonight is going to be. There's so much value. You can come in here and you can have 3 of the most expensive guys and fill in with 5 value positions, right? There are slates where you're not going to be able to do that. And I think one of the advantages of SaberSim is because we can just very easily build lineups that are optimized for a particular contest without having to spend in with a traditional optimizer. You're only going to optimize for average projection. So the optimizer, if you don't tell it to do anything else, is just going to give you a bunch of cash lineups. You actually have to figure out for yourself what is the optimal lineup construction for that particular slate, and then tell the optimizer what it is. And then the optimizer will follow your rules. It's almost backwards, right? With SaberSim, one of the biggest strengths here is because it's optimizing for upside for a particular contest that you're playing. You can ask, SaberSim can almost be treated as an advisor here, and you can say, what are the viable lineup constructions on tonight's slate? What do winning lineups look like for tonight? And actually, it looks like maybe things are a little bit more balanced than I expected. It looks like there is actually a lot of nice 7K type value. So you can see just looking through here, right? A lot of these lineup constructions are actually like 1 10K guy and then some 6, 7K type players. In this case, it's a 9K guy, more balanced build here, and then a little bit of cheap value on DK at least. But you see a lot of these builds, right? So this kind of tells you this is the easiest construction tonight to get to, right? But it's actually, there's definitely some viability on more balanced builds like tonight. So, but good question. All right. Joe Baby has got a question for me here. All right. I will often create a build in the morning. How different is that from creating a build in the evening? If I do not adjust exposures and open an early morning build and press update projections, shouldn't that be the most up-to-date build? Or am I doing a disservice by not building before lock? You are absolutely doing yourself a disservice by not building before lock. The main reason why is that, so we just built this, right? It's 12:15 local time for me. I could wait until the end of the day and right before lock come in here, click refresh projections. And I would get, at that moment, the best 20 lineups out of this build at that moment in time, right before lock. But I am still choosing from just basically in the grand scheme of things, a very, very small pool of 500 lineups that was built 5 hours ago, right? When you build right up against lock, what you'll do is you'll get the best 500 or a pool of 500 or 1,500 lineups at that moment in time and then pick the best 20 out of that. So I cannot stress enough how important it is. You should start with a new, fresh build when you are ready to put your lineups in before lock, and then enter that way, because you want to make sure that this pool of lineups is as accurate as possible with the information you have at that time. A really good example of this is like, let's look at the entire pool. So let's say later today, Thaddeus Young gets ruled out, right? He is in 40% of these lineups. Now, of course, you could come in here and refresh this, and there would absolutely be 20 lineups of your remaining pool of 297 that don't have Thaddeus Young. The builder would be able to find 20 lineups in here that work. But now you're not even working from a pool of, you're not even picking the best 20 out of a pool of 500. You're picking the best pool of you're picking the best 20 out of a pool of 297. And other things like that can happen. And the projections are going to change, right? What if, let's say as a result of that, here's even actually a better example. Let's say hypothetically is DeJounte Murray's playing, right? Let's say DeJounte Murray gets ruled out, right? These are just total hypotheticals, right? And now the best overall projected play on the slate is just say hypothetically Lonnie Walker, right? Well, there's 129 lineups in here that include Lonnie Walker. Sure. Right. But now you're only picking between lineups that don't have Thaddeus Young and do have Lonnie Walker. So now you're essentially building between a pool of 79. You're picking the best 20 out of a pool of 79. Right. And you can see how this pool very quickly becomes out of date with itself with just a few minor changes to the slate, or significant changes, or just any changes overall to the slate. So when you sit down to build your final lineups, nothing wrong with building in the morning, seeing how things are looking, putting in some lineups into your contest so you don't miss lock on accident or anything like that. But your final lineup, you should build a fresh build before lock. So, all right, cool. Those are the questions from the Slack chat. Let's hop over to the YouTube chat here. Keep it going. Brad has got a question for me. He said, I watched your video on NBA DFS Showdown lines earlier and noticed sim variance was always at 10 for you. But when I feel like when I run 20 max entries, it usually defaults at 8. Should I bump that to 10? It depends on the size of your contest, right? So let's see. It depends on the size of your contest. So I believe, so by default, the 10K to 50K 20 maxes will have it at 10. The 1,000 to 10,000 will drop it down to 8. What this is basically saying is that when you get below 10K total lineups, we don't actually need to play lineups that are optimal for a single game simulation, right? We can drop and we can play lineups that are optimal for, I don't know the exact number at 8, but it's, probably less than 10 game simulations, right? So a smaller set of thousands, right? To give you an idea, right? So we're talking about a smaller set of simulations of thousands, right? So you'll get lineups that are a little less variant overall. I don't think there's anything wrong with this, right? This is where our back testing has led us with the sliders. I like on a more personal note, like just for me with the way I play, I like to know that when I'm playing a lineup, right? I like to know that I'm playing a lineup that is optimal for a single game simulation, right? That's just my personal, I like to play a little bit higher variance. So I will almost always build all of my showdown lineups like this, even if there is some discrepancies between, sometimes the sim variance slider might come down a little bit. I also typically turn the ownership fade off just because my approach to showdown is to just basically play the single game simulation optimals and generally assume that kind of gives me enough diversity against the field there. So this is what I roll with. I don't think there's anything wrong with either. I don't think you'll get spectacularly different lineups either way. I just like to know that I'm playing single game simulation optimals. So, Brad said, also in that situation, should I still drop down below the 50K mark? It doesn't matter. It does not matter. I assume this is what you mean. It does not matter what your actual drop downs are here. It only matters what the sliders are. So the drop downs are just a tool to help you get close to the right sliders. But if you do this, it's no different than doing this. So hopefully, I'm not sure if that's your question here, but the drop downs just help you get to the default sliders for a contest. They don't actually have an impact in and of themselves. So. Oh, okay. And then Brad said price-wise. Yeah, this is an interesting one too. I go back and forth on this. The only reason it makes sense to drop max salary down is if you're trying to avoid duplication. I think if your default slider for sim variance for a showdown is not already 10, then you probably don't even have to worry about duplication. Like in part, I think sim variance being not 10 here says that there is enough room. Like we can even afford to not play a single game simulation optimal and be profitable in this contest. So we almost certainly don't have to worry about being duplicated, right? Like if we were worried about duplication for this particular contest, the first thing we probably would want to do is this rather than this. Right? Why start capping max salary when we still have room to simply just like diversify the lineups is the way I think about it. So I really only start adjusting maximum salary to avoid duplication when my variance is already at 10, right? This is basically saying I'm using a single game simulation. I'm playing as a high variance strategy as possible. I'm playing as diversified as possible. And I still am worried that people are going to duplicate me because there's maybe only so many lineups that work. Then you can start to incorporate some of these other blunt tools from there of I need an additional effort to avoid duplication, right? I need to do more to avoid duplication. And maybe, ownership fade, you leave it on if you want, but that's how I think about it. So yeah. For Showdown, like this, there are a ton of viable lineups for virtually any sport in Showdown that are below 49.5 or even lower than that. This typically is not going to like hurt you. I would say it's very unlikely that you're ever going to end up in a situation where dropping your maximum salary down to avoid duplication in a Showdown contest is a big mistake that you should not have done. It's probably at worst neutral to your EV. So, all right, cool. Eric said, "What's the deal with having to clear the cache lately? Just wondering, kind of annoying. How often does this happen?" Thanks. Yeah, I know it's annoying. The Control Shift R is like the easiest way to just quickly get rid of it. The reality is that this sometimes can just be a local browser issue, that this is nothing on our end, that if your browser has just kind of stored bad cache, you might just need to do it sometimes. That's true of a lot of different web apps and websites. The main reason why, like, you will sometimes see SaberSim reps on support or in Slack say, try clearing your cache, often ends up being that we've pushed a new update to the app, or something has changed in the app. And if you have an old version of the cache that is no longer valid, then you have to clear the cache. But that's kind of the short answer there. So Edward says, "Do you recommend this research build settings for the NBA?" I don't really. And I'll talk about why. It's not going to hurt you. I'll say that much. You are not going to. I wouldn't say that by doing the research build, you're going to end up worse for wear. I don't really do it in NBA for a couple reasons. So the first is that I think to do a successful research build, one that you are actually going to use and take action on, you really need to have the projections available to you or the simulations available to you that match the way that you're going to build lineups for the contest. And in NBA, the final sims and final news, especially like tonight, 4 games at lock, there's going to be news breaking up right up against lock. Probably 5 minutes or less before lock. And frankly, I have found that from my process, I don't have time to, with the final sims, run a research build, learn something from it, and then act on it in an actual set of individual lineups. There's just no time for it. And even if you were able to get it done by 5:30 or by 6 or by 7, there's more and more late swap news changing. The information continues to change throughout the night, right? The leverage plays that you might have identified at 5 o'clock are now not leverage plays because there's better plays that have opened up elsewhere, or different things like that can happen. That is the primary reason that I don't like running these research builds on NBA. I would rather just play with the way that the builder thinks is optimal at lock and get my edge late swapping. Last night, perfect example. I had a great night of NBA last night. I had a legitimate sweat for the mini-max for a while. I ended up coming in second, which was pretty cool there. I think the biggest, highest EV swap that you could have done last night was swapping for the Suns lineup. Cameron Johnson started for the Suns, and they played big. He was owned at about 20% in those contests. Probably if that news came out at lock, it would have been over 30%. Just even at 20%, just very under-owned overall in that particular contest, right? And this happens every night. So I don't feel like the main reason I use research builds is to get an idea of where there might be ownership inefficiency. And if there's not ownership inefficiency, then, well, actually, in NBA, you are most likely to get your ownership inefficiency from late swapping, right? People are not going to swap after lock. So I think that's just better overall. That's the main reasons I don't really like to do this in NBA as much. There is one other reason. I think it's a little bit more on the theoretical side of things. The other reason that I don't like to run research builds in NBA is because one of the core assumptions that you are making when you run this research build is that the percent chance of a player showing up in the optimal lineup for that slate is equal to the percent chance of that player showing up in the winning lineup for the contest you're playing. And for sports and contest sizes and slates where your sim variance by default is very high, right? This kind of works. In other words, in sports where the winning lineup for the contest is the optimal, the mathematical optimal, or very close to the optimal, a research build is going to work better, right? But in sports where it isn't, right, we don't need an NBA very much to find the actual mathematical optimal on the particular slate. You can tell that purely just by where the sim variance slider is by default. The research build gets worse and worse. It is going to undervalue well-projected plays, and it's going to overvalue poorly projected plays. So I would, even if you overcame the late swap thing and overcame the issue of not having a lot of time before lock, I would still proceed with caution in NBA because the core assumption behind the research build is a little shaky because of where sim variance is by default for NBA and how much distance there is between the winning lineup for a typical contest and the actual mathematical optimal, right? You can compare that with a variety, a ton of different sports, right? You can compare that with golf, right? I think golf is probably one of the better research build sports out there, right? Because you very nearly need the optimal to be successful in golf. Or at the very least, you need to embrace a ton of variance. The percent chance of a golfer showing up in the optimal lineup does roughly mimic the percent chance of that golfer showing up in the winning lineup for your contest, right? You can tell that by sim variance being very high. So anyway, all that to say, no, NBA is probably the one sport where I essentially never really run these research builds apart from just out of curiosity for those reasons. So, all right. Eric said, I always wait 10 minutes before lock to upload my CSV. How early do you build your lineups? A lot of times it's 5 or 10 minutes before lock, but I always about 30 to 45 minutes before lock, I will just do a run. I will just build some lineups and just throw them in. Because I have had situations where I am ready. I have my CSV ready to upload. Lock is in literally 60 seconds and my internet blips for a second. And my internet goes down and I can't upload and I miss lock, right? Now, DraftKings has recently changed that. So if you missed lock tonight and just had reserved entries in there, empty lineups, they would at least let you build lineups with the remaining games on the slate. That didn't used to be the case. It used to be that if you missed lock with reserved entries on DraftKings, you were just out of luck. And when that happens, it is devastating feeling. So now in the interest, and I highly recommend you guys all do this too as well. I would recommend, even if you're planning on waiting kind of till the last second to get things in or the last 10 minutes or so, just take the time to just build lineups 30 to 45 minutes beforehand with plenty of time. Don't change anything. Don't worry about what those lineups look like. Just build with default settings, default projections. Just let it rip and get some updated lineups in there. And then worst case, something happens. Maybe you have to step away, right? Maybe you get a phone call that you can't miss and it takes you away from your computer for 15 minutes and you miss lock. You know that you had lineups in there that were good up until about 30 minutes ago, and then you can always late swap later. So you really don't want to end up in that situation where you miss lock because it sucks. It is the worst. So Jared said, when running 150, you have a 4-person core and someone pops up with higher ownership than your core players. Would you lower the ownership of the non-core play? This is an interesting question. So I don't do this. So I guess I should qualify this answer by saying I don't take this approach. I don't build cores, right? Personally, I kind of allow my core to come to me, right? The core that I'm playing in 150 on DK will basically be my 4 highest exposed players. But assuming that you did, I think it depends a little bit on the rule that you're setting. For some people, a core means 100% exposure. For a core of 4 players to some people means 100% exposure to all 4. At that point, right, it's going to be kind of hard to have more exposure than any one of those guys. I guess let's say you're doing a core 4 and you're doing must include 2 or must include 3 from that, and then someone pops up showing up more often than your core. I probably wouldn't adjust it personally. I'm kind of like thinking through this for myself here. I probably wouldn't adjust it because to me, what that means is that like even despite the fact that you set a rule forcing exposure to certain players into your lineups, there is still a player that the builder thinks is even with the scarcity of roster spots that is still available after honoring your grouping rule, there's still a player that projects so well that he's showing up more than your core. I would probably leave it alone because at least you still know your core has been honored, right? Every lineup still has 1 or 2 or 3 of the guys in your core, which is what you wanted. But there's probably some player that is just spectacularly well projected that you probably want a lot of exposure to. So I would probably leave it alone. I think the biggest thing I would probably say, like with exposures with core players, is if I were to set a core, let's say I set a core of 4 guys and I said I want 3 in every single lineup. One thing I would probably do is I would probably try to make the exposure of those 4 guys kind of flat. I would want about 75% exposure to each of them, right? Because that's kind of the idea of the core. That's probably all I would look at with exposures here. So with cores. Let me know if that helps, but good question. Another question from Brad here. Random, I noticed quite a few DK players in the same showdowns as me using SaberSim. Tia, Kelvin, Mike Face, even you, I believe. They typically have some of the same lines as me and will have 3 or 4 offlines. How do you/they pull those offlines? It's not a direct answer. So basically, like, how do you get some of the unique lineups? Yeah, I mean, you especially on Showdown, like, you're going to have some dupes. It's hard to completely avoid dupes. You can definitely dupe some SaberSim users as well. I think SaberSim puts you in a position to be unique far more often than any other optimizer because of the sim variance, right? Because of the fact that you're picking single game simulations from a pool of 5,000 plus game simulations, you have a pretty good shot at being unique, especially compared to other tools. To give you my honest answer here, and now I'm curious what your DK name is because I've probably seen you in there as well. I don't put a ton of time in NBA showdowns to intentionally avoid duplication, just because for me, there's 4 or 5 on a given night. I will eat some dupes for the opportunity to just play every single showdown. Like I don't have time to spot check every single individual showdown contest for that night for duplication avoidance. If you see me with a unique lineup, it's probably because I got luckier with the fact that I happened to pull a lineup that was a sim that other SaberSim users didn't get, basically. If I'm going to spend a little bit more time on an NBA showdown slate to specifically avoid duplication, it will be for the night game. The night game always is the biggest contests. This kind of contest, like, will have like some legitimate prize pools. These are the night NBA showdown has some legitimate prize pools. When I take steps to intentionally avoid duplication, it is very similar to what I have talked about in other videos, especially my NBA Showdown video on YouTube, but even some ideas from the NFL Showdown, right? So this, to me, is a good time to start thinking about your max salary. I will typically build a really wide pool just to see what we're working with here. And then, it's as much an art as it is a science, as like, it kind of takes looking at that individual game and trying to think, what are people going to do, right? Like, what is going to be popular? Not even on SaberSim, right? But in the field, what are people going to do? Like, I'll see what this looks like, but I am pretty confidently willing to say that LeBron is probably going to be overowned at captain, right? Like, not even overowned, right? This isn't even about ownership leverage or ownership inefficiency. Dupes are about just like scratching off lineups that are going to get overplayed, right? Okay, like here's a perfect example, right? 100% LeBron. Maybe that's optimal, right? Maybe that's the strategy you end up taking. But there are a ton of other varieties of lineups here, right? Like, who's going to click on Reggie Jackson instead of LeBron if they're hand building or using a traditional tool, right? That's not going to be very popular. Right? But your pool of 1,500 lineups is probably very diverse. In this particular case, especially if you were playing and investing more in this particular slate, maybe you change it up, right? And intentionally avoid duplication. You can use other strategies too as well, right? I don't know, is this game even? Okay, so this is another thing that I pulled from NFL, right? I love this strategy. This is a game with a probably a 1.5 point spread, right? Probably probably everybody assumes that this game's going to be very close, right? That typically leads people to playing balanced builds. So don't play any balanced builds, right? Let's do this. Oh, I actually think the easier way to do this, the easier way to do this is in stack types, right? Do this, right? If you're really intentionally trying to avoid duplication. There is so much diversity in any showdown contest of what viable lineups look like that you can generally get away with doing almost anything you want within your, I mean, eventually I'm going to run into like, even if this was 150, right? Eventually I'm going to run into the message saying, we can't find lineups in your pool. So right here, right? So if I was playing 150, the builder would basically say like, no, you can't do this. We don't have 150 in our first 1500 that match this. But at that point, you can kind of relax some of the stuff. Or, one thing you can do is maybe you just get rid of, let's go back. Let's reset everything. Maybe you just get rid of the 3 threes and the LeBron captains, right? Maybe do that. Now there's plenty of lineups. So again, to summarize here, on a given NBA slate, NBA is daily. There's NBA games every day. There are multiple NBA showdowns every day. The contests are a little bit smaller than what you see in NFL. So I'm not as aggressively focused on trying to avoid duplication on a slate to slate basis. But if you were, I think the same strategies that work in other showdowns work here as well, right? Target game scripts that the field isn't going to think about, right? Adjust your captain pool to play the highest leverage captains you can find, and cap your max salary and go from there. So, but also, I guess good opportunity for this. This was mentioned in SaberSim Slack yesterday, but this is a thing now. You can actually see the like player position now in your lineups here. So not super useful for NBA Showdown, but probably definitely for NFL. I know this is something that people have been wanting to see for a while. So Rost, meaning like roster position here. So pretty cool. But all right, let's keep it going. Ron, what's your process when the builder can't rebuild a certain amount of NBA late swap lineups when it comes to big changes? Good question. Let's talk about it. So typically, most of the time, that happens when you're late in the slate, and big news, like a higher salary player typically has gotten ruled out, and you have some lineups. I don't even want to say a lot. You have some lineups where because of rules you have set, there is not an available swap available. Right, you can't find a player to take that spot. Really good example, right? These West Coast teams in particular, these West Coast games, if a stud gets ruled out, right? Let's say you have one lineup, you get to the end of the slate and you have a lineup that the only remaining player is LeBron, for example, right? And then he gets ruled out, right? It can be hard for the builder to find somebody to put in that lineup. So here's what I do. There's a couple basic steps when you're in a pinch, right? What I basically do here, the first thing is I will typically just turn my player filter off, because I would rather have a guy projected for just 14 points than a guy that's not playing basketball that night in my lineup. So I will typically turn the player filter all the way down to 0 and turn it off. In the actual late swap build settings, so I know this is a real build, but in the late swap build settings, right? So imagine this is the late swap. A couple other things I'll do. I will turn min salary down to 0, right? I don't want the builder to prevent using a 48,500 salary lineup because of a min salary at that point in the night, right? The late swap's got to get done. So I turn min salary down to 0. I don't use min uniques very often, but you'll want to turn this back to 1 if you do and you're having trouble, right? Basically, it's like get everything back to default as best as you can, right? If you've changed positions in utility, that's a good thing to change as well. Just recheck all of those. And then I think also if you have stacking rules or groups at that particular point in the night, just remove them, right? The main thing here is when you're talking about there's like 1 or 2 games at the end of the night, you've gotten tonight there's 1 game at 8, my time. You've gotten all the value out of all your groups anyway at that point, pretty much. You got all the value of your stacks and your groups and your min salary and your min uniques and anything you might have done at that point through 90% of the rest of your lineup. LeBron's not playing ball that night and somebody needs to take a spot in the lineup. Get rid of the rules so that the swap can take place. That's my best overall advice for when that happens. And that's what I do. I just basically just start peeling stuff off. Min projection filter, gone. Min salary, gone, right? Any other stuff like that. That's the easiest thing to do. So, all right, cool. All right. Question from James, who just signed up today. Welcome, James. I'm glad you found office hours. He said, for GPPs, how do I find core plays in your guys' tools, or is it best to just change my unique exposure in my run of lineups of your guys' projections? Also, what do you think is a safe number to use for unique and exposure for FanDuel and DraftKings? All right. So, James, I'm going to give you kind of a quick overview of kind of what we're doing when we build you a lineup. Because it's a little bit different than what a lot of other optimizers do out there. And I'm going to kind of work around to the point that I don't think you need to set any min uniques, and you can ultimately kind of find the core for players. Actually, let me put it this way. You will automatically kind of develop a core for yourself in the process. So what happens, first of all, when you're using SaberSim, right, we don't just give you average projections for players. We simulate all the games on the slate play by play 1,000 times. That means we have the full range of outcomes for a player, right? So when we say Luka's projection is 53.79, right? Everybody has average projections. We have the full range of outcomes of all of the different ways that the Mavs game can play out, all of the different ways that they're the different outcomes for a player, right? And why this is important is that when we actually build lineups for you here, right, we don't use the averages to build anything. Pretty much, apart from cash game lineups, right? If you play cash, we'll use the average projections. But for your GPP lineups, right, we will take random sized buckets of game simulations for each individual lineup that is in line with what contest you tell us you're playing. So if you're playing a single entry, right, smaller field single entry contest, we're going to use a lower sim variance slider, right? That's going to take a big bucket of sims, use something resembling the average projections to build your lineups. If you're playing a big contest, the 150 max, right, we're going to use really small buckets of sims. We're going to have really wide ranges of outcomes for your individual lineups, right? So what this means, I guess, for the min uniques portion here, right, for this particular point of the question, I typically always leave this at 1 because you are going to get a lot of natural diversity in your lineups automatically in a way that fits the contest you're playing based on where the sim variance slider is set, right? So let's go ahead, let's build these and take a look at this here. And you'll see, with a traditional tool, you go in there and you just start building lineups without telling it to make lineups that are high variance, right? Without telling it to make lineups that are diversified, you're going to get a ton of lineups that look virtually identical to each other with just one or two players different. That's not what happens here, right? So we'll go in, we'll build some lineups. If you see this message, by the way, it's just a DraftKings regulation. You need to make 2 changes to see the lineups. I think a very easy, quick thing to do is to just quickly adjust 2 projections. But you can see, I mean, even right here, right, we're pretty diversified, right? There's a pretty diverse line of exposures here, right? And you can see as we go down, the lineups themselves they're going to share players in common. The best plays on the slate are the best plays on the slate, but there's going to be kind of quite a bit of diversity here automatically without setting a unique. So I think if you're interested in adding more diversity to your lineups overall, I would recommend trying to adjust your sim variance slider up first before changing your min uniques, because doing that is going to give you more diversity in a way that also leads to more upside, right? You're going to take on more risk doing that, but you're going to get more diversity in your lineups in a more kind of upside focused way. In terms of a core, right, for I guess your first question chronologically here, we don't really have published cores or plays or picks or anything like that for a given slate. The main reason why, I guess there's kind of 2 reasons why. The first is that cores in general for particular sports are very contest dependent. I think one of the things that, there's a lot of sites out there have their cash core and GPP core, and that's a good start. But in reality, the best plays that are out there for single entry and for 150 max and for 20 max and for contests that are 500 people and contests that are 150,000 people, right? There's a lot of different variance in the optimal strategy for those contests. So we don't want to go out and say, these are our favorite 4 plays on the slate tonight and have one person apply those for a 150 max and have one person apply those for a 100-man league, because they would be different players that are optimal for each of those. But the second reason, and I actually think maybe the better reason overall why we don't give cores is because our cores ultimately are in line with the way that our simulations and projections are set for that particular slate, right? If you wanted to know what is our kind of core plays for a 20 max from 10 to 50K people, you could run the build for yourself and kind of take a look and kind of decide where that core is for yourself. I would say the core, if there is to be one on tonight's slate, what the projections are right now, is probably like something like Lonnie Walker, Christian Wood, Scotty Barnes, right? That's kind of like for this particular contest size. There are certain slates where you'll see after running the build that there'll be like 3 guys that are locked, right? On a slate where there's really 3 spectacular value plays, right? Not literally locked. I'm sorry, I want to be clear. They won't literally be locked when you finish the build, but you'll have 3 guys at 100% exposure, for example, right? And on those slates, it's like there's a very clear core. Tonight, things look a little more balanced, so there's not as much of like a core. With all that said, that's kind of our approach. We do have partnerships with a number of other DFS content providers: Run Pure, Simplify, DFS Karma, Full-Time Fantasy, all of these other sites that do offer a lot of content and partner so you can use our SaberSim optimizer directly in their sites. If you want published kind of cores and content articles and things like that, I definitely recommend checking some of those partners out. But that's kind of our approach. That's basically why we don't have them. So hopefully that was kind of helpful as like a brief introduction. I hope to see you back here. And if you have any other kind of follow-up questions for me, just let me know. So, okay, cool. So that's all we had for questions. We have about 8.5 minutes left here before the hour. We're going to do something fun. We're going to do a little bit of a demo. I've teased this at the start of the stream. So we're going to do a little demo of a couple new features that have come out, particularly one. There's one I really want to show to you guys because it gets asked all the time. So you go over to the entry editor. And this will, again, there'll be an announcement about this in Slack later today. I'll put probably a video up on YouTube as well. Actually, hang on 1 second here. Give me a sec here. I need to do a refresh. Because I don't think I have my updated entries in. Okay, yeah. So now we're in business. Okay. So I know this has been something that's been asked about. Oh, where did this go? Oh no. Hold on. What's going on? This is a little disappointing if I got everybody all gassed up and it's not working, but I might need to announce this later in Slack. If at the very least, if I can't get this to work, I will just tell you guys what it is, and we'll have it fixed probably before the end of the day here. Let me see if that helped. Okay. I think we're in business. All right. We're good. I'm not sure what that was. I'll figure out what exactly what was just happening there. Entry editor will look a little bit different. There's a new icon here next to the checkboxes for each of your contests, and you can now drag and drop these. So you can order these contests here, and you can also still, sort them, right? The sort always works. You can order by entries here, right? Okay, there's definitely a bug here. I am just noticing it now that we will get fixed. But it doesn't. I don't think it affects the core functionality here. So let's keep talking about this. I see Guy Will Gamble's in chat. He's excited about this. So this isn't even the best part, right? Like that's cool, right? I guess you can order your contest, but why is that cool? So there's a new fill method in here. It is called unique rank. What does unique rank do? Unique rank will fill your lineups uniquely, but in order of the contest as they are sorted here on the app. So in other words, right, I know this has been kind of common request of the way that this would work is I want to build, let's just turn all these other lineups off, right? Maybe you're playing just the and one and the quarter, right? And you want to make 40 unique lineups, but you want your top Saber score lineups in the and one, and then your next 21 through 40 in the quarter jukebox. You can now do it in the app. right? So let's actually get a lineup set here of 40 so that we can actually just do this. So pretty exciting. I know one of the hardest questions I've ever had, or not like ever had, but a common question that comes up on this stream all the time, and one that was always just kind of difficult for me to answer, is people would say, if Saber score matters, if playing the highest Saber score lineups is best, which it is true, that's something that I say here all the time, and it's best, all other things being equal, to play a unique lineup into every contest, how can I get my top Saber score lineups into my most expensive contests? And basically, up until today, the answer was you kind of can't. Now you can. So unique rank, right? What this will do is this is going to fill, there'll be a 40 lineup set that is filling both of these contests, but the top 20 are all in the and one. The next 20 are all in the quarter jukebox, and it will follow the order overall of the lineups as you've put, or the contests as you've put them in here, and you can tell us what that order is. So if you say the most important, or the contest that I want the top overall lineup in is this one, then it would be that one would be the first one to get the lineups. A couple other things about this here. Rank stays the same. The old one that was just called unique is now unique random. So unique random will do what unique used to always do. It will basically just pick random lineups out of your pool and fill them randomly into your contests. And exact match stays the same as well. So pretty exciting there. I think I did notice the bug here just a second ago that if you use the sorts here, so we'll fix this obviously, but for those of you that are watching, if you use the sorts here, like to sort by the buy-in, for example, you lose the ability to edit it over here on the left. Matt, if you're watching here, found a bug. Don't know if you are, but I'll let you know either way after this. You lose the little sorts here. So you would still be able to use unique rank if you wanted to just sort purely by buy-in. If that does happen to you in the meantime, it looks like a good workaround is to just re-upload your entries file. So you can do that. We'll get that fixed. But anyway, unique rank live. You can now fill lineups uniquely while also taking into account the actual rank of the contest you want. So very cool, very exciting stuff. And yeah, so that's been a popular request for a while. So excited to get that one out. But oh, Matt is watching. So sweet. Saves me the trouble of re-recording it. So, but all right, cool. Well, I don't see any other questions here. I think that's it. So we'll leave it there. But enjoy unique rank. Good luck in your NBA, NHL, League of Legends, Golf Showdown, MMA, NASCAR. Man, be a busy weekend of DFS here. Good luck in all your contests, whatever DFS you're playing this weekend. Maybe you're taking the weekend off. That's just as well as well. I had a weekend off 2 weekends ago. I still feel refreshed from it. So nothing wrong with taking a little bit of a time off from the DFS streets. But anyway, good luck this weekend. Enjoy the unique rank. Have fun playing DFS, and see you guys on Monday. Take